Hey, you're listening to the Uprev Ninja podcast, and this is your host, Tom Hudson, with episode number 58.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Uprev Ninja podcast. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us. This show is produced each week with the single intent of discovering the tips, tricks, hacks, and lessons learned from our guests that has catapulted them into living the best version of themselves. Join your host, Tom Hudson, as he continues his search for the best methods to uprev his life. Now, let's dive into the show.
Today's guest is Valerie Groth. Valerie is an executive coach and internationally acclaimed speaker who has received national attention for her innovative work as a social entrepreneur. She is also the nonprofit founder of Ryan Banks Academy, a nonprofit building Chicago's first boarding school for urban youth. Her book, The Power of the Possible, The Dire State of Inner City Education and One Woman's Revolution to Fix It, was released in December 2017. Hey, today on the Uprev Ninja podcast, I got Valerie Groth with me. How you doing today, Valerie?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
You know, I'm excited to talk to you. My wife's a school teacher, and I read your book, The Power of the Possible. I guess now it's been maybe a couple of months, so what did I read in there again? But no, it looks like you've done some amazing work, and I'm not going to spoil it for everyone. So I'd rather you kind of tell us, who are you, and what are you all about?
Yeah, well, thank you for reading the book first and foremost. I really appreciate that. I feel like it's always hard to describe what I do succinctly. I do a lot of things. I work as a coach. I used to be a therapist, kind of segued into coaching. I would do some speaking. I am the author of a book that came out last December. But the vast majority of what I do is I am the founder and CEO of a nonprofit called Ryan Banks Academy, and we are building the first boarding school for inner city youth in Chicago. So happy to dive into that further, but those are kind of the multiple hats that I wear. So sometimes the coaching and sometimes the speaking, and the book is kind of like in the middle of both worlds. But the majority of what I do is building this kind of audacious, massive nonprofit that people said couldn't be done, and we're doing it.
So what drove you into that? I mean, did you just wake up one morning like, hey, I want to do this massive nonprofit?
Not quite. So I used to be a school social worker on the south side of Chicago, and I worked with really awesome kids going through really tough environments outside of school. So homelessness, poverty, violence, abuse, neglect, a lot of things that I never had to even consider, growing up, and that most of my friends, thankfully, never had to go through. But there are tens of thousands of kids, really over 100,000 kids in Chicago that are dealing with this kind of trauma on a regular basis. If you're just thinking about the homeless population of kids in Chicago, the estimates are 80,000 homeless kids a year.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah, you could fill a football field. So, and that's, again, just homelessness, not talking about violence or the other challenges. So there's a lot of kids in trauma in Chicago. And I was one social worker to about 1,000 kids. And I realized pretty early in my work that it was impossible for me to really make a serious impact. And I went into the work wanting to make a difference and help and change the world. And I realized within that system, it just wasn't going to happen, and that we were failing a lot of kids because we couldn't provide them with the right resources. So yeah, I had the idea early on, and kind of thought that one day when I'm retired, that would be my big project. I'm going to have all of this time and all this money sitting around, and I'll do it then. And through a series of multiple events that I'm happy to talk about further, I just realized there's really not ever going to be a good time to do that, and quit my job to make it happen.
Well, I know when I, your book, it's dedicated to Ryan Banks, and how, some of the story that you kind of cover with that. Yeah, I can imagine that, you've got this particular skill set, and I can't imagine, I hear, teachers have concerns about, when there's 30 students in the classroom trying to educate them, and that's 30, and you had 1,000, and
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know Dunbar's number, right? You know 150 people's names, and you only get to intimately know 150 people. How
Mhm.
can you do 1,000 people and really, push that needle and move it? So, yeah, I can't imagine the kind of, this is your life's passion, and I can't imagine how that kind of made you feel before you dove into this. I mean, that had to be frustrating.
Yeah, it was really tough. And I mean, these are amazing kids. And I wanted them, I wanted them to get away from the tough things that they were dealing with. But I think the system just isn't set up for those kids. And I started to see that there are other models out there that can do a better job of giving those students who are trauma exposed this wraparound, holistic 24/7 environment. And like you mentioned, I lost a lot of kids to violence and to the neighborhood, but one in particular I worked really closely with. And his name was Ryan Banks, and he was shot and killed when he was just 12 years old. And Ryan was an amazing kid. He was doing nothing wrong at the time. He was playing with his younger brother on the front steps of his home. And the only crime was that they didn't have an air conditioner and it was a hot May day. You and I spoke
Yeah.
before we hit record. It's in the 90s here in Chicago, almost 100. It's 90 where you are. And I'm sitting in my cool air conditioned apartment, thank goodness.
Okay.
When you're a kid living on the South Side and you don't have air conditioning, you're forced to go outside. As hot as it is, it's better than being inside of your hot, stifling house. And so, had Ryan even had an air conditioner, he would still be alive today. And that to me is a travesty, that kids, just don't have a choice, and that they are put in these situations of having to deal with violence at such a young age.
So I guess we can take this two different paths. One, what got you into being a social worker, and one, where you're at today and the work that you're doing today. Just, what kind of held you back? What challenges did you have to overcome to go down the path that you're on today?
Oh gosh. Well, there are still plenty of challenges.
We all have them.
The time. Well, I think to go back to how it started, and I think I might have told the story in the book. I had the idea for a long time, like I mentioned, and thought, one day I'll be in my 60s and retired and live in a cushy life and money, and I'll kind of figure it out then. Like I'll hire someone to help me or whatever, and I'll build a school. And I was at a conference in Portland 4 years ago this summer, and Michael Hyatt took the stage, and he mentioned in his speech that he spoke to an actuary before the event. And the actuary told him that out of the audience of 2,000 of us, the odds were, according to mortality tables, the odds were that two of us would die in 30 days.
Wow.
And yeah, so in that moment, something hit me. And, everyone kind of knows, that about our mortality, and that there's never a good time to start living and yada yada, right? All those cliches and platitudes. But it really hit me like a wall of bricks in that moment. And I realized I can't continue to push this off until I have the time and the money, and that there are kids who need this now. And here's what stuck with me in that moment is I had this realization that there is no guidebook. I think before I was waiting on the how.
Yep.
And I wanted to know, how do I do this? And I didn't know the answer. And I had gone to school and gotten my degrees in this work, but they don't teach you how to build a school. They don't teach you how to build a boarding school. So I was waiting to have this how to kind of given to me. And I had this realization that absolutely nobody has that. So if you take the mayor of Chicago or the president or Oprah, they don't have that path written out for them either. All they would do is figure out who are the right people, what do we need, and they would pull together the team to make it possible. And in that moment, because this is so kind of crazily big and audacious and almost impossible, it made it seem so much more possible, if that makes any sense. It kind of leveled the playing field. And it made me realize that because it's never been done, I don't know, I could kind of figure it out in that way. So I don't know, it seemed more possible and more doable kind of looking at it with that reframe.
Yeah, no, isn't it amazing? Just a simple, I say a simple reframe. How many times in your life do you like come across like, oh, I've been looking at this wrong for a decade? But
Yeah.
it's amazing how a simple reframe can just totally change their view of, and turn into something as profound as the work that you're doing now. So when you started out on this journey, I have to imagine that you had mentors along the way and coaches and stuff like that. What did you come across, like any real stumbling blocks that really kind of terrified you and made you like, maybe I'm not doing the right thing right now?
Oh my gosh. So many. Oh gosh. It's entrepreneurship in and of itself, I think, has very high highs and very low lows. Um, Compared to kind of, being in a traditional 9 to 5 world. And building a nonprofit, I think, is that same way, but to the nth degree. So there's nothing more amazing than, the days where things are working in your favor. And when you make progress towards a vision that was previously just a dream, and to see it come to fruition is a really amazing thing. But the hard days are really, really hard. And I had to be really purposeful about how to get through those days in a healthy way, to not lose sight of what's important. And to me, it's a combination of surrounding yourself with the right people, having the right healthy habits in your life. I also have kind of this crazy thing that I tell myself. Even yesterday was a day where everything just kind of seemed to, be going wrong. Just opportunities that we thought were a sure thing were falling through. But what I think about on those days is, I tell myself that if this is ever turned into a major motion picture, no one wants to watch the days where things go well. Like,
No.
that's really boring. There's no story there. And, assuming that were to ever happen one day, not that I care about being made into a movie, but just the idea that, no one's rooting for the person where things are handed to them. Right. And
Right.
it's those days where you really feel tested, and you can get through it and then go to the next level. Like, that's how things happen, and how you can kind of create the magic.
So, building a nonprofit out and, the work that you're doing, I'm sure it comes with a lot of anxiety and frustration and stress. What do you mentioned healthy habits and having the right people around you. What do you do from a self-care perspective to make sure that,
Mm.
you're able to do these things, these wonderful things that you're doing?
Yeah. I have to be really purposeful about it, because I could work all the time if I wanted to. And
Yeah.
just like any entrepreneur,
I was-
like, you could work on Friday nights and you could work on Christmas Eve.
Absolutely.
So it's hard when you love your job, right? Like, I love to work. People often go to the movies or go, have cocktails to have fun. And I'm like, hey, this is fun. Like, working is fun. I'd rather be doing this sometimes. So I have to keep that in mind and realize how important that balance is, and that you need that time off to come back refreshed and focused. And so I've been trying to put in some really strong boundaries around when to stop work at the end of the day, on the weekends, on holidays. Turning off my phone, disconnecting, I think, is huge. Meditation has been fantastic. And I think for me, like everyone, I think it's an ongoing evolution. I don't feel like I'm, quote, good at meditation, but I do it. And I know that's half the battle, is sitting down and having that time. So when I can build in that time once or twice a day, that's really impactful, I think, on my ability to kind of deal with the stresses, in the best way. Exercise and yoga have been really great for me too. I live by Lake Michigan, and just going and walking to the water is the best too. I think being in nature and getting that time in.
That's awesome. I actually think I learned how to swim in Lake Michigan.
Did
I'm
you?
pretty sure that's where I learned. Yeah.
Up in Michigan?
Yeah. Yeah. So long ago. So it's funny. You mentioned meditation and not being excellent at it. Obviously you know this. Like just the fact that you're putting time aside is is a huge. I'm actually going through yoga teacher training right now, so I'm a huge fan of yoga. um, but just out of curiosity, something I tried probably 3 months back or so was going to like Flute Therapy. Are you familiar with this?
I have heard of Float Therapy, and they do have them in Chicago. I haven't tried them. I think I'm a little bit freaked out about the thing closing over you. It sounds a little claustrophobic, but I've heard it's fantastic. So I think I should probably bite the bullet and check it out.
Yeah, well, check it out. Like the claustrophobic thing, or they do have some that are almost like a really large bathtub with like an 8-foot ceiling. That it's still dark. Some of them you can turn lights on. So there are ways get out of that. But honestly, like you get like an hour of solid meditation. For me, my wife doesn't agree with this, but it's actually more relaxing than a massage for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. What a testament.
So I, just something to think about, and yeah. Anyway, so what about what kind of experience have you had that's just kind of really building this nonprofit, and you started out essentially no funding, no money, and you've got this vision, and now I know you're doing well. You're making a positive change in the world, or especially there in the Chicago area. But what about? Did you ever just hit a wall? Like trying to get when you started fundraising, stuff like that. Anything where you just like really felt like it was kind of come to the end, and maybe you didn't have that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have definitely been those days. Like I said, like the lows are really low. And
well, what did you do to, get out of that lowness?
Besides my crazy movie theater movie analogy, I think it's probably so many things. I have a really awesome support system.
Okay.
That's been probably the biggest learning lesson that I have gained, that I'm always trying to impart to my clients and friends going through this, is I think it's so important to have mentors, people who are doing similar work to you, people who are doing totally different work to you, but who are a few steps ahead of where you are, that are closer to where you want to be. I've learned that so many people want to support those who are doing kind of out there unique things in the world. And I think just asking for that support has been a lot easier than I thought. And without mentors and advisors, I don't know what I would do on those days. So I think that, go ahead.
I was going to say, I hear that a lot, just, simply asking for input, help or assistance. Like that's often the hardest thing to do, but the dividends are, amazing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have a whole network of people. Like I have people that I can call for tactical advice about fundraising for nonprofits, and I have people that I can call if I need to cry. I have people I can call if I need them to remind me not to quit. I have different people for different things, and I think I didn't do that a lot in my former work, and I think it's something we don't often talk a lot about. And entrepreneurs do seem to be really good at kind of making that a priority. But I think everyone can benefit. I think if you work in a 9 to 5, or you stay at home with your kids, I think everyone needs that support system outside from just their spouse and their friends and their family. And I think having that advisor or that mentor who is a little bit more objective too is really helpful, just like hiring a coach or a therapist, right? I think if you're going to your friends and kind of talking to them about your challenges, they're always going to be kind of putting their own lens on things through their history with you and their own background, but having someone totally objective who really kind of has you as a person and as a professional and your goals in mind, who can see that big picture vision where you're going to kind of like getting stuck in the weeds is really important.
I think you mentioned something there that really rings true. I think in like the corporate world, there's a lot of like just competitiveness, or you don't want to come across as quote weak, so you won't ask those questions. You'll go to Google, but you won't ask your colleagues, and I think it holds you back. And what I've seen in the entrepreneurship world is people will say, "Here's my business plan." Like, not only do they ask a question, but they're like, "Here's everything I know about the business I'm starting or that I'm involved in," and they're just the transparency is so different, and the amount of help people get, it's amazing. So, I do agree with you. I think having the right people, that support network and everything like that's definitely helps all of us, try to get to that next level. So Valerie, what about balance? How do you do all this? Like you said, most entrepreneurs, they're in a role because they absolutely love their job and everything that they do. But how do you balance it? You've got your job, you've got self-care, family, friends, your dog, stuff like that. How do you balance it all?
I don't have a dog, but I often pose with my niece and nephew dogs on Instagram.
See, there you go. You've got a dog.
Yeah, they feel like mine. So kind of like I touched on, I think finding time to disconnect is really important.
Okay.
So I have a set time right now, and I think you kind of go through seasons and waves. But right now, I try and stop working at 6:00 at night and turn off my computer and stop emailing. And it's really hard when emails continue to come through all night. But the more that I can disconnect, the better. I've tried to only have a couple hours of work on Saturday and to take off for the most part on Sunday, which is really helpful. And making sure to just build in time with, friends and family and making that a priority. Because again, I think it's so easy when you run the show and you're the person in charge to feel like the work never ends. And I think for me in the past, I would see my volunteers and my board members, and they're not working full time, but they're working a little bit here and there. So I'd get an email from one person at 6 a.m, and I feel like, well, I should be working at 6 a.m. too. And then someone else is emailing at 11:00 at night, and it's like, well, if they're working at 11:00 at night, I should be working too. Not understanding that they're putting in little slivers of time here and there. But there was that pressure, I think, to be constantly working because someone else always was. And, there have been a lot of times where I worked 80, 100 hours a week or much more. And, thankfully, I feel like I've got pretty good energy and I can do it for a period of time, but I know that's not sustainable. And I would never tell anyone else to do that. And even when you love the work that you do, life has a lot more to offer than just work, even when you love it.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of research out there that shows after so many hours, your productivity, at 40 hours to 80 hours, you're not doubling your productivity at that point.
Yeah.
And there's also decision fatigue. I want to say the book, I think the name of the book is Willpower. And it talks about the only way, for you to make decisions, it takes, willpower, and over time, your clarity and the ability to make the decisions begins to dwindle, and you begin to spend more time like, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? And the only way to refill that gas tank is by sleeping.
Yeah.
And so that's why you see like the Zuckerbergs and, Steve Jobs and, folks like that, they always wear the same thing because it's like one less decision that they have to make. So it's interesting, some of the research out there about that. So along those lines, Valerie, what are you currently working on in your life trying to get to that next level?
The first thing I think about is with Ryan Banks Academy, we are opening this fall with our first class of students. We're going to be a day school while we build the boarding part of it. But we are opening in a couple months. So we are hustling and fundraising, and that's a huge focus. So we're trying to raise as much money as possible. We have an event coming up in Chicago for anyone who happens to be in Chicago in mid-July. I've been doing some kind of speaking gigs and promotional work for the book, which has been a lot of fun. So I think the focus for me is fundraising. We've built an amazing team. We've started to hire some incredible staff for the school, which has been exciting. So just continuing to fundraise, and also for me, again, to keep focus, and the balance piece, I think, is a big priority for me. Because as you can tell, like if I didn't have those parameters, I could easily work all day, every day. But a big focus for me this year has been trying to really be conscious about putting in those boundaries, knowing that it's not just for me, it's, how the organization will run better if I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I can only imagine September when the school year starts. They're going to have a whole new set of opportunities in front of you.
Yeah.
Well, so let's say there's someone out there listening today, and they were in the same boat that you were in at one point. Like, when I'm 60 and I've got a cush lifestyle and everything is very happy and go lucky with me, then I'll start that project.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone out there that's got this idea and they're just terrified to get started. What kind of advice would you give them, or guidance?
I can say this. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't had that moment. And I think eventually I would have come around to the same decision. But I could have easily kind of kept at that mentality, like one day when the time is right. But I am eternally grateful that I did have that moment happen, and that I made the decision that I did. And even though I've been harping on, the lows are low and it can be really hard, it is also the most beautiful, exciting, fulfilling, fun thing in the world. And it sounds really, gushy and cliche to say that. So with so many superlatives, but I mean, I get emotional whenever I talk about it, because I think the work that I do, I wouldn't trade for the world. And, in a lot of ways, the challenges are greater than any former jobs that I've had in the past. And, the compensation is not there like I've had in the past with this particular role. And yet it's the best experience to be a part of making something come from nothing to being a concrete entity that will change lives and that is going to impact our community. And that's just a really cool thing. And I wouldn't do it if it also wasn't really fun. And I always try to explain that to new people who are coming onto the team. Like, you're going to work really freaking hard, and it's going to be a lot of long hours. And because you're a startup, we're going to have a lot of obstacles ahead of us that you wouldn't have in a different job that's been around longer. But you can be assured that this will be incredibly fun and incredibly exciting. And I think a lot of people don't get that feeling. And I would love to see a world where everyone has that kind of passion for their job, where the lows are low, but the highs are just so incredibly, incredibly high and fulfilling that it makes all of the hard days worthwhile.
Well, I might be biased because I've got your book right in front of me, but everything you just kind of said is the title of your book. It's the power of the possible. Like that's essentially if that's the essence of what you just stated, which I think is awesome. So, Valerie, so I know you have a GoFundMe happening right now. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a GoFundMe, which is gofundme.org/Ryan Banks Academy. And we are, helping to raise money for getting off the ground this fall. we are doing a lot of other big projects besides the GoFundMe. So that's not our only source of funding, but that's a great place for people around the country to get involved. For those who aren't here in Chicago and can't go to our local events. So if anyone is interested, we would absolutely love your support. And we are a 501c3, so everything is tax deductible. And there's a lot of fun prizes on there too, in terms of different donations. You can get a copy of the book or naming rights and a lot of cool things for donors.
Awesome. Well, so other than that, what's the best way to contact you if people have any questions or just want to learn more about the work that you're doing?
So if they have questions about Ryan Banks Academy, they're welcome to go to ryanbanksacademy.org, or my email is valerie@ryanbanksacademy.org. Any questions about the coaching or the speaking or the book, you're welcome to get in touch that way too. Or my other email is val@valeriegroth.com. I'm also pretty active over on Instagram, which is just my name as a handle.
Awesome. All right. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you would like to touch base on before we close out?
I think we touched on a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
Great questions on your end. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for your time and for coming on the show, and again for the work that you're doing. I grew up in a small town ranch community in northern Texas. I don't want to say we didn't have these challenges, but my entire town was less than 5,000 people. So,
Wow.
Yeah, when you say there's over 80,000 homeless children in Chicago, I mean, that's just like blows my mind away. So, thank you so much for the work that you're doing, Valerie, and for your time and for coming on.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
We covered a lot in this episode, but the main thing here was just discovering, what Valerie does for self-care. And we discussed yoga, meditation, walking, just simply being in nature, and finding time to connect with people, which most importantly meant staying off of your work email and making sure that you're not working 24/7. So those were some of my key takeaways from this episode. What were some of yours?
Thanks for listening to the UpRev Ninja podcast with your host, Tom Hudson. Navigate to our website at uprev.ninja today, where you will find additional resources to help you discover the best version of you. While you're there, join our newsletter and join the discussion on your favorite social media platforms. We've got some awesome guests lined up to share with us how they are becoming the best versions of themselves. Again, thank you for listening. Now it's time to go out and uprev your life.
If you haven't, please head on over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review for the show. By doing so, this helps the show get noticed by more listeners and helps spread the word of how to discover the best version of yourself. Also, if you have any feedback about the show or a guest that you would like, please go to my website, https://uprev.ninja, and contact me. This week's review comes from Showtime Killa. Big ups for UpRev! This is one of my new favorite podcasts. Tom Hudson is a seasoned interviewer, and the guests provide wonderful insight. Can't recommend the show enough.